about that health scare then. So one evening in, I think, May of 2014, sound asleep, and all of a sudden I woke up bolt upright with my throat blocked and no air could get in. It literally felt like someone was choking me out. And before you ask, there was nobody else in the room, so this was literally, what the hell is going on? It sent me into a blind panic because essentially my windpipe got blocked. No idea how. There's nothing stuck there physically. And with my air pipe being blocked, it also played havoc with my food pipe. So now I had to rush to the toilet and get my head in the bowl because all manner of things were happening. And with my windpipe blocked, I couldn't say anything or even express any sound, because every time I went to say something, it'd come out in a really, really hoarse whisper. And I had no idea what was going on here. And like eventually, after a few minutes, my sort of windpipe would spring like back to life, and I would just be in this pile and state of like ragged breathing, and I had absolutely no idea what the fuck just happened, but I didn't make anything of it. I just felt, okay, it's a one-off thing and it's not going to happen again. But it wasn't a one-off thing. Now, the second time it happened was again completely out the blue. I was on the sofa, I was watching the cricket. Something happened in the game which, caused me to celebrate a bit, and again it just flapped shut. And again, felt a chokehold. Interference with my food pipe, again rushed to the toilet to deal with that conflict, and I thought, what is this? I was freaking out about it. I had no idea what it was, and it was at that point I thought, right, I'm gonna have to break my proud 20 or so year record of never had to visit my GP, because I have no idea what is going on here. So first time I went, the GP ended up saying, oh, it's just like a flu-like virus thing going around. Just take some painkillers and come back if the problem doesn't go away. Which is weird because I didn't really feel any pain. It just was like, why is this coming up at random moments now? Because I did feel at something, well, my windpipe closing spontaneously, rendering me not to be able to breathe or communicate or do anything, was a bit of a stretch to call it a flu-like symptom. But then look, you trust what the GP says, right? So it's like, okay. So I left sort of unconvinced, but I thought, okay, I decided to be ultra careful with my food intake in case that aggravated it. But even with the painkillers, the problem cropped up again, even though I was careful with my food and that kind of thing. The next time it happened, I was watching the Football World Cup. Again, out the blue, it wasn't even a match. It was the opening ceremony, I remember. And, just sort of relaxing, watching it on the sofa. And it flapped shut again. And it felt even more severe this time, where it was like it took even longer for the pipe to flap back open. And it was really not pleasant, and the whole thing just made me miserable, frightened, tired, not knowing what the fuck this was. But even then, it did not trigger me to go, right, I have to go to hospital, or I have to go to see my doctor in an emergency. I felt with what was going on, like, right, I've seen the doctor already, they've just said it's painkillers, let me just try changing the painkiller, and instead of like paracetamol, try some Nurofen and shit like that. I just thought, okay, I'll just keep going on with that. But now I was really scared of, like, okay, all the incidents so far have been at home. What if this happened in the office? That would just be awful. I did not want that to happen. And to that extent, I remember loading my pockets up with Strepsils just to try and numb that area all day, just so that it didn't, go out of control. Not that I had any control over it, but I thought, well, just numb the area, right? But I thought, I can't keep that pretense up. As I said, like, I was just miserable and tired at the time anyway, and just thought, right, do you know what? Can't carry on like this. Let me go see a GP again. And the same surgery, but I saw a different GP this time, maybe on rotation or whatever. And, explained what was going on. And in a few minutes of conversation, he prescribed a course of antibiotics, which cleaned up the problem in 10 days. So what happened basically was my epiglottis, which is basically the dangly bit at the back of your throat, had become infected. And I asked him, what's the cause? I haven't had any flu-like symptoms or cough or cold or anything like that. And look, in thinking back to the first guy, he did say it was like a flu-like virus thing going around, so maybe that was part of it, I don't know. But this GP said, probably stress. And when he said that word stress, it all brought it home to me. I was unhappy in my job for the first time in a long while. And I'd just taken it on without me kind of really being bought into it. And I'd never really done anything about the situation. I just let it carry on. So that was a real light bulb moment for me to go, right, the stress of this job, it feels new because it feels different from what it was before. Yes, I'm in that environment where it wasn't really one of my choosing or making, but, this was now, 7 years into the job, and it felt like, right, okay, I don't feel I'm enjoying this anymore. A few months later, I went back to my old team full time, and this is where those changes I just mentioned started to feel a lot more closer to home. The management team had changed. People were getting burnt out more than before because it felt like they weren't receiving enough support on the day-to-day that they were going to, as well as not being able to escalate to management for two main reasons. Management weren't there physically half the time, and also escalating to them would just bring about more questions, sometimes in a kind of accusatory manner, that made them think that, like, well, I'm trying to communicate a problem here, and I'm kind of being accused for it, that I've not done enough about it. So it felt like they were being thrown under the bus, especially in the face of senior management or the desk. So when I went back to my old team, they introduced a whole load of fancy titles at that point. So my role changed from manager to lead specialist. So instead of junior members in the team escalating upwards to management, they would escalate issues to me, which was fine, but you could see the whole vibe of the team, and indeed the whole place just felt so much more strained now. Look, the regulations in the industry were changing that had made things even tighter than before, with basically less margin for error. There were complicated new business flows that were being put into place, migration strategies happening all over the place, and people were moving on. There was a real shift away from, I can't leave Goldman, where can I go, to like, no, there are other places I could definitely go and have it better. Let's get that straight. I don't need to flog myself to the world's end. There are places that I can probably get more money for a lot less intensity. So I mentioned people moving on just then, and none more significant than my good friend, who, in essence, he and I together, along with a couple of other people in the team, pretty much ran the team for a few years. Especially, he stayed longer in the team than he should have, in all honesty, and he probably would have left a year or so earlier if he and I hadn't have chatted and I hadn't sort of convinced him to stay and see if things got better. But seeing as they hadn't in the year, and both on a personal and team level, he had had enough by the time I'd moved back to the team, and I couldn't really stop him or convince him any further. So when he left, it really did feel like a big blow. And indeed, a couple of other people, part in jest, part in kind of, well, actually, no, true, kind of said, like, feels like your right-hand man, or best guys left. I'm like, absolutely. Don't get me wrong, there were still talented people in the team, and the team would, continue and stuff like that. But it really felt like a real watershed moment of like, okay, he was one of the last of the people that I'd sort of been along with from my early years to where we were now. He'd now gone, so it's like, whoa. And as I said, the other guys that were still left were more than capable of continuing and doing well, but I knew how stretched we were becoming as a team in terms of like the years of experience that were there and availability, and the fact that of the people that were left that had been around, they were starting to get strained, tired, and it felt like people going through the motions because they've been through those cycles and promises of like, oh, things are going to change for the better, and they never fucking did. So soon after my friend had left, he contacted me saying, well, there's actually a role going on in the team that he joined, a role coming up basically, and I should apply for it. I was hesitant as fuck. Why? Because even though I didn't like my job, my needs were being met, especially coming to the key one of certainty and control. I knew the systems here, I knew the people, I knew the processes, and if I moved, I wouldn't know what I was doing, it'd all be new, and I would be leaving the pedigree of the name behind. Because at that point, yes, I'd clued on that Goldman's was the world's biggest investment bank or stuff like that. So it's akin to like a footballer deciding to leave a big club to go to somewhere kind of less big, basically. So after a couple of interviews I had with my friend's new company, the team manager and a couple of other people, I was still hesitant. There was a lot of umming and ahhing of like, what should I do? What should I do? I don't know. I declined the role. And that really pissed my mate off because, he said like, well, what are you doing? Like, Goldman's aren't going to change. They've gone to pot. It's not going to get any better. And you're just going to sort of waste your time there. And ultimately, he'd be proved to be right because my time at Goldman's came to an end a few months later. But I distinctly remember walking out the front doors, not panicking, not worrying, not stressing, but with a sense of thank fuck for that. No more div season, no more traders. Now, what my subconscious was protecting me from when I was hesitant taking the role beforehand was the fear of change, and essentially the uncertainty and the fear of change. But now the situation had changed where suddenly I felt relieved and lightened. So in other words, the worst scenario of me thinking the world would end if I left Goldman or I wouldn't be working for Goldman anymore or anything like that hadn't come true. In fact, the opposite had happened, but I felt the opposite. Essentially, it was just a story I'd been telling myself that I couldn't change jobs or not work at Goldman any longer.